What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode where we're talking about some of the most major news stories that have been taking place in the world. To name a few, the capture and arrest of the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, as well as the ICE involvement in Minnesota, and lastly, some of the appointments being made by the new mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani. So let's get straight into this. On January 3rd at 2 a.m. local time, U.S. forces have had captured and arrested the acting president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Now, Maduro is considered one of the most evil people in the world today. He's considered to be a leader in the global narcotics trade. He was unduly elected and still assumed the position as president in Venezuela, and leaving a the significant amount of reasons that you can point to in terms of the justifiability of the U.S. making such an arrest. Some of the other factors that are involved in Venezuela that have led to this situation is their ongoing involvement in uh, the sale of sanctioned oil, and mainly trade of oil with U.S. adversaries, namely China, Russia, and Iran. Now, this becomes a national security threat. China is not considered a close ally of the United States, and they do not share similar interests. Iran is considered a global player in terrorism and the suppression of individual rights, so on and so forth. And Russia, which is currently invading another country. And by allowing Venezuela to continue in that trade involving oil, they are powering these countries that have completely unique interests from not only the United States, but really the Western world. Now, this is also a step forward when it comes to the liberation of the Venezuelan people who have persisted under the oppression of one of the most corrupt and, again, oppressive governments, uh, really in the Western Hemisphere. So this gives the Venezuelan people the opportunity to advance their country forward, something they haven't had the chance to do in decades. Now, the operation itself was executed flawlessly by US forces, who were very quickly able to move in to capture Maduro and to bring him to be held in US facilities, and not a single American life was lost in the process. So again, this was a mission that was executed flawlessly. And me personally, as an American, this gives me a great deal of confidence in the US military moving forward. It really just goes to show the strength, the power, the coordination that our forces have in executing these operations and these missions. So just personally as an American, this gives again, it gives me a great deal of confidence in our military. Um, some of the countries that you find across South and Central America that have made statements regarding this arrest, typically it's more developed and more democratic countries that are in support of these actions. And the countries that oppose these actions are mainly other players that are involved in the trade of narcotics, such as Colombia and Cuba. So you can see there's a stark difference between, who's in support of these actions and who's against these actions. However, here in the United States, the two sides of this issue is, of course, along party lines. The Republican Party, led by President Trump, are very much in support of having taken this action, and Democrats are seemingly against Trump having executed this mission. And you can even see there's been outspoken politicians like Kamala Harris, Zohran Mamdani, AOC have all come out and opposed Trump having taken these actions. Now, I think a good representation of how Democrats feel on the issue can be seen in a post that Kamala Harris made on X. I'll read the post and then we can break it down line by line and see where it is she's coming from. Kamala Harris on January 3rd at 7:05 p.m. I'm in Central Time, posted, and I quote, Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela do not make America safer, stronger, or more affordable. That Maduro is a brutal, illegitimate dictator does not change the fact that this action was both unlawful and unwise. We've seen this movie before. Wars for regime change or oil that are sold as strength but turn into chaos, and American families pay the price. The American people do not want this, and they are tired of being lied to. This is not about drugs or democracy. It is about oil and Donald Trump's desire to play the regional strongman. If he cared about either, he wouldn't pardon a convicted drug trafficker or sideline Venezuela's legitimate opposition while pursuing deals with Maduro's cronies. The president is putting troops at risk, spending billions, destabilizing a region, and offering no legal authority, no exit plan, and no benefit at home. America needs leadership whose priorities are lowering costs for working families, enforcing the rule of law, strengthening alliances, and most importantly, putting the American people first. So that was what she had to say on the issue. And of course, on the surface, this is something that the Democrats have been championing. This is, very reflective of the American left and their politics regarding the situation. So I think that this is a great post to break down and to see, what's right and what isn't. So let's go line by line. She says, Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela do not make America safer, stronger, or more affordable. However, actually, they accomplish all three of these goals. This makes America significantly safer by restricting the flow of narcotics into our country. Because again, Nicolas Maduro is one of the main players globally in the narcotics trade and was using the central institutions of an entire country to pursue that agenda. So right off the bat, though, this makes America significantly safer, contrary to what Kamala Harris had to say. Um, Further, Donald Trump's actions do not make America safer, stronger. Well, this makes America stronger. Clearly, this asserts our power in the Western Hemisphere that we're, again, able to go into a country, arrest their president, and not lose a single American life in the process. And we've seen support from, again, other South and Central American countries. So this certainly makes America stronger or more affordable. Well, again, this makes America more affordable because now with the U.S. controlling Venezuelan oil, gas prices in the U.S. went down. So she's made one, just in the first sentence that she's had to say, she's already gotten three things wrong. But let's continue. That Maduro is a brutal, illegitimate dictator does not change the fact that this action was both unlawful and unwise. So she concedes the fact that the guy is pure evil, but she then goes on to say that it's unlawful and unwise. Well, it's perfectly lawful. The president has the power to execute military operations. Of course, Congress holds the power to declare war on a country, but we haven't declared war on Venezuela. Maybe I'm missing something, but we're not at war with Venezuela. Nobody's declared war. We made an arrest. Making an arrest is completely different than starting a war. And if you want to look at presidents who have completely bypassed Congress to start wars in other countries, look no further than Barack Obama, who did it multiple times. So this is perfectly lawful what Donald Trump did by executing this mission. And then she says, and unwise. I think a great deal of wisdom went into this arrest. Again, this makes not only America safer, it makes South America safer, it makes the world safer. It was a mission that was executed flawlessly. This was a very wise move by the Trump administration. So now we're two sentences in, and she's already been wrong five times. The next sentence, we've seen this movie before. Well, I mean, not really, but I mean, again, if you want to point to the president carrying out military operations, I think the movie that she's pointing to is the Obama administration. She's probably going to suggest George Bush and going into Iraq, but I mean, in terms of the complete bypass of Congress that she seems to be suggesting, I think the movie that she's talking about is Barack Obama. Nonetheless, let's keep going. Wars for regime change or oil that are sold as strength but turn into chaos, and American families pay the price. Well, there hasn't been regime change in Venezuela. The same people who were in charge of the country are still in charge. We just arrested one person, and then the vice president of the country took over. So the same officials that were in charge before are still in charge. However, they seem a little more willing to work with the United States now that Maduro is out of office. So this hasn't initiated regime change in Venezuela, so I'm not sure where she's coming from there. Or wars for regime change or oil. Oil is one factor in play, but again, there's a whole host of things that are involved in this situation. Things like the liberation of millions of people who have been subjected to oppression and corruption by their government for decades. That's something that she seems to have left out. The flow of narcotics that are killing tens of thousands of Americans each year. Again, something she seems to have left out. As she says, sold as strength but turn into chaos. Um, again, America definitely proved their strength by executing such a flawless mission. And I'm not seeing the chaos that she seems to be talking about. If the chaos is again, the liberation of millions of people, I wouldn't describe that as chaos. And American families pay the price. Again, I'm not sure what price American families are paying other than lower prices at the pump. But let's keep moving forward. She says the American people do not want this and they are tired of being lied to. Now, I think that this was a great move by the Trump administration, and I think Americans all over the country would feel that way. I think the millions of Venezuelans who have had to flee to other countries and had to leave their life behind because of this oppressive dictatorship, they probably want this too. And I'm not sure what she means that Americans are being lied to. I think the Trump administration has been very upfront with announcing the arrest, and even offering some of their reasoning behind doing so. I'm not sure where she's suggesting the lies are being told, but if you look at what just the first few sentences of what she's had to say, I think the lying might be coming from her. Nonetheless, let's keep breaking this thing down. This is not about drugs or democracy. It's not exclusively about drugs or democracy, but those are certainly some major factors at play within the situation. So in some ways, I mean, actually, in a lot of ways, yeah, it is about drugs and democracy. But again, it's about a whole host of issues that are that have been plaguing Venezuela for decades. So drugs and democracy are certainly part of this conversation. Again, just I think in every sentence she's had to say, she's gotten at least two or three things just completely opposite from the truth. Nonetheless, keep on moving. It is about oil and Donald Trump's desire to play the regional strongman. It is about oil. Again, there's a whole host of factors at play. Oil is certainly one of them. Um, so she's kind of right there, and oil is part of the discussion when talking about this situation. So I'll give her partial credit for this one. And Donald Trump's desire to play the desire to play the regional strongman. It's in America's best interest to maintain control over our hemisphere. You know, again, Venezuela is committing complete atrocities against their own people, let alone the rest of the world. So, I mean, if there was ever a time to play the regional strongman, it's now. If he cared about either, he wouldn't pardon a convicted drug trafficker or sideline Venezuela's legitimate opposition while pursuing deals with Maduro's cronies. I mean, these are just allegations, just because again, this plays into the whole, the Democrat narrative of let's hate Donald Trump more than we care about anything else. So she, I guess here she's throwing in some allegations against Donald Trump, whatever. Then she goes on to say the president is putting troops at risk, spending billions, destabilizing a region, and offering no legal authority, no exit plan, and no benefit at home. Well, putting troops at risk, not uh, correct me if I'm wrong, not a single American troop was harmed in the process of doing so. Again, they executed their mission flawlessly, and they should be celebrated for doing this instead of scrutinized. Spending billions. Um, First of all, I would imagine Kamala Harris has absolutely no idea what this operation costed, and it certainly didn't cost billions of dollars. Um, so it's just blatantly false. Destabilizing a region. This didn't destabilize a region. If anything, it stabilized a region. And again, all kinds of developed democratic South American and Central American countries are pointing to this as a success. So the region is celebrating these actions. The only people in the region opposing it are other countries that pursue the trade of narcotics. So again, not sure what she's talking about there. And offering no legal authority. Um, well, if she's suggesting that Trump didn't have the legal authority to do this, he most certainly did. It's very clear. If she's suggesting that if maybe she's pointing to international legal authority, um, again, there was no international laws broken. If you even consider international law to be legitimate, and just pointing back to the Biden-Harris administration when she was the vice president, they put a bounty on Maduro for $25 million for someone to come and arrest him. So offering no legal authority, well, she's the one who offered the legal authority that Donald Trump executed. Again, just confused by what she's trying to imply there. No exit plan. Well, we went in, we made an arrest, and we left. We very quickly exited. I'm not sure what she's talking about here. Again, with no exit plan, we exited very quickly. And no benefit at home. Well, there's tremendous benefit at home. If you want to point to something easy like lower gas prices, there's a benefit for you. If you want to get more complex with the issue, if uh, consider talking to Venezuelan Americans and see how they feel. People who are here in the country who have who are directly affected by what's happening in their home country, who seem to be celebrating because this happened. So there's benefit to all Americans with affordability, and there's benefit to Venezuelan Americans who might actually have the chance to go home and visit their families for the first time in God knows how long, at least decades. And then in her last little uh, sentence slash paragraph here, she says, America needs leadership whose priorities are lowering costs for working families, enforcing the rule of law, strengthening alliances, and most importantly, putting the American people first. Well, this action lowers costs for American families, it lowers the price at the pump. Enforcing the rule of law, this most certainly enforces the rule of law by making an arrest of someone that she even said is an illegitimate dictator. So, enforcing the rule of law, this is a very clear example of doing so. Strengthening alliances, again, all kinds of South and Central American countries have come out in support of this arrest. So we're strengthening alliances in our hemisphere, most certainly, and putting the American people first, which is, of course, she's trying to, because America, Donald Trump has the America First slogan, and so she's trying to make a twist on that as if he's not putting Americans first. Uh, if any, just this puts people first over just Americans first. This puts people first. And if you want to point to the America First agenda, Donald Trump very much campaigned on lower gas prices, which uh, this reached that goal, but that's not, again, that's not the only thing that this achieved, most certainly. I mean, you want to talk to the millions of Venezuelans who have had to flee their country, the just in general, this puts people first, which she seems to be leaving out. Yeah, well, so that's her tweet word for word, and if you were counting, which I was, she actually in one post on X, she was wrong 21 times. She got 21 things wrong in one post. Now, maybe you get one or two things wrong here and there, and we'll forgive you. But if you get 21 things wrong in one post, I think it would be fair to say that that person is lying. Now, and again, just by things that are empirically obvious and evident, everything she said was wrong. And she's just playing politics. Again, this is part of the liberal and progressive talking points of, well, we hate Donald Trump more than we support anything. And that's the crowd that she's playing into because that's what is working for Democrats is let's oppose Donald Trump at every single turn, every single thing he does, regardless of the success, the outcome of those actions, and let's just say that we hate whatever he's in favor of. And so that really that's what this whole post was, how much we hate Donald Trump and this and that and it's really disingenuous and it's detrimental to the overall benefit of the American politic. But aside from that, we are left with a handful of questions, namely, what happens next in Venezuela now that this has happened, now that their president's been arrested, and because this does create a certain amount of uncertainty within the Venezuelan political system. And so I have a few points of some um, short-term and long-term goals that I think America should be pursuing in terms of the future of Venezuela. First of all, it's um, significantly important to maintain control over Venezuelan oil and as well as restricting the flow of narcotics coming out of Venezuela and into the United States, but into other countries as well. So that's first and foremost. Because again, you have a country that's sitting on the largest oil reserves in the world, and their main trading partners are China, Russia, Iran. uh, countries that share no similar interests to the United States and to the Western world. So that comes first and foremost is to maintain control over oil and to continue restricting the flow of narcotics coming out of Venezuela. Second, to in terms of involvement within Venezuelan politics, the next step would be to gut many of the programs found within the Bolivarian missions, which was a series of socialist programs that were initiated under the Hugo Chavez regime, who was the predecessor to Nicolas Maduro. And many of these socialist programs are funded directly through Venezuelan oil. Now, it would be very difficult for Venezuela to grow in terms of their economy and to level out the hyperinflation that the country has seen for decades without limiting the socialized programs that are found within their law. The next step would be to ensure and enforce private property rights within Venezuela, something that is relatively common when a country is taken over, for lack of a better term, are the implementation of certain capitalistic policies, and most importantly, the enforcement of private property, which is actually something that's guaranteed within Venezuelan law, is the recognition of private property rights. However, it's something that the government has just completely trampled over and neglected and thrown aside for their own interests. So that would be the next step is to ensure that Venezuelans have recognized private property rights. And the final step would be the ensuring of well-run elections in Venezuela because you just can't have happen what recently happened in Venezuela's 2024 election, where the candidate who assumed office received only about one-third of the popular vote in a country where the president is elected through popular vote. Because again, that's just, it's the pinnacle of corruption, let's be real. You just can't have that happen in a country, and certainly not in a country that sits on the largest oil reserves in the world. And as, a country that's in our backyard, we can't let that happen. You just can't have a president who completely bypasses all democratic institutions to assume their place in power and just completely neglecting the will of the Venezuelan people. So those are my 4 points in terms of the best actions to take moving forward in Venezuela. I certainly don't think all of these things are going to happen. I just think that that would lead to the best outcome long term. And again, not just for the Venezuelan state, but for the Venezuelan people. All right, moving on to our second story is the involvement of ICE in Minnesota and particularly in Minneapolis, but Minnesota at large. Recently, as was all over the news, there was a deep tragedy where a woman lost her life after being shot by an ICE agent. And so the contention has gone into the circumstances involving what had happened. Now, this woman who was found to be part of some radicalizing organizations that they train people to go out and impede with the operations of federal agents, namely ICE agents. And this woman was blocking the street with her car. And so the ICE agent then approached the vehicle and tried to persuade the driver to move aside and continue on with her day. But the woman stayed blocking the road for over 3 minutes. So she was, there's also video of the situation. You can see that this woman was completely refusing to cooperate with this ICE agent who was just trying to carry out his job. And before long, the ICE agent was telling her to step out of the vehicle, likely to have her arrested for impeding with his operation. And no sooner does he attempt to have this person detained, and she tries to hit him with her car. So, and of course, the ICE agent felt as though his life was in danger. If you've got someone trying to hit you with their car, chances are you're not particularly safe. And so it was at that moment he discharged his firearm and took her life. Now, this has led to widespread protests and all over Minnesota, all over Minneapolis, people who are refusing to allow the operation of ICE within their city, within their state, and which has created all kinds of other problems within Minnesota. Now, some of what's fueling these protests are local and state officials. You've got Governor Tim Walz, who says that ICE is kidnapping innocent people. The mayor of Minneapolis, Mayor Fry, says that ICE needs to leave and that ICE is terrorizing people. Congresswoman Omar says that ICE agents need to pay for this. I'm not certain what she means by paying for this, but I assume she's not talking about finances. And a lot of this rhetoric that you're seeing from these local and state officials has led to the FBI restricting these officials from participating in the investigation into what had happened between this ICE agent and the woman who was shot and killed. And, of course, you can see why there's no objectivity in the sentiment coming from these officials. They are, if anything, they are fanning the flames of chaos in the streets of Minneapolis and in Minnesota. So again, you can understand why the FBI would take that sort of a stance against having state officials involved in the investigation. And personally, I don't think that, Governor Tim Walz or Jacob Fry would have any sort of incentive to objectively evaluate what had happened. I think their main objective would be the prosecution of ICE officials for deporting illegal immigrants. Now, it's been released in terms of who exactly is being pursued by ICE within Minnesota, and the as well as the crimes that these illegals have committed in terms of why it is they're the ones being targeted. Now, the list centers around people who have committed murder, who have committed rape, who have committed armed robbery, things that just make the public completely unsafe and things that risk the lives of ordinary Americans. So it seems confusing why they would want to restrict the operation of ICE, who was going after some of the most dangerous people that society would even have to offer, beyond the fact that these people are here illegally. These are people nobody wants in their country. These are people nobody wants in their neighborhood. No one would ever consider involving with these people socially. These are some of the worst people in all of society, and these are the people who ICE is in Minnesota to pursue. So it really just goes to expose the left on which side of crime that they're on. Because you can't, in one breath, say that ICE is this terrorist organization kidnapping people and terrorizing Americans when, it's very clear who they're after and why they're after those people. And it just it doesn't make sense to me why they would take this position, but that's the side they've chosen to take. So to each his own, I guess. But man, when your own is let's stop ICE agents from deporting murderers, rapists, and armed robbers, then I don't want to be on that side, you know? And very recently, in protest of ICE, there was a video of a man who barged into a church and started shouting at Christians who were worshiping God as his way of protesting against ICE, which is a seemingly confusing. And he claims that the Christians who are there in worship of God are somehow promulgating these fictitious violations against the rights of American citizens, and he even goes so far as to attempt to be the arbiter the of Christianity and the Bible. However, I think that's concerning because the Bible pretty clearly says to respect the authorities. The Bible suggests to follow the laws. So if anything, the Christian thing to do in this situation would be to support ICE and to oppose illegal immigration, because again, this is a violation of law. These are the authorities in power who are pursuing justice, who are limiting the ability for people to violate the law. So, I mean, if you want to get biblical about it, the Bible says to respect your authorities. It's and if you believe that God is in control, well, God's the one who put those authorities in place, and again, that's what the Bible says. So, I mean, and just on the surface level, to just go into a Christian church and start shouting at worshipers is, I mean, it's just it's terrible. And, who does something like that? Let's be who does something like that? It's a disturbed person who would do something like that. And it just points to the underlying agenda of the left and of progressives. This concept of undermining a law-based society, undermining Christian Judeo principles in pursuit of God knows what, disorder and chaos, and just opposing the basic principles that built the Western world. And so with that, we are moving on to our final story, which is taking place in New York City and some of the appointments being made by the new mayor, Zohran Mamdani. Now, recently he appointed a woman named Lillian Bonsignor to be the commissioner of the New York City Fire Department, which has received criticism uh, surrounding her lack of experience, as this person has never actually fought a fire. This person has never put out a fire. Um, and her experience within New York City is answering phone calls for EMS. So Mamdani appointed someone whose career has been answering phone calls to be the head of the fire department. Now, some prominent voices like Elon Musk and Ted Cruz made posts on X about their disagreement with this appointment. Elon Musk went so far as to say that people will die because of this, and Ted Cruz, kind of jokingly, but um, cleverly joking at his position on the issue, says that it's a great idea unless there's a fire. And it's not the furthest thing from the truth. If you appoint someone to head the fire department, it would probably make the most amount of sense to appoint someone who's fought fires. So it doesn't in terms of the validity, the veracity of this appointment, On the surface level, it doesn't appear to be a very strong appointment. Again, considering that this person has never actually fought a fire and is going to be leading the fire department. So Mamdani, he comes back and claims that this person was actually selected for her experience. Now, what experience is he pointing to? Well, again, on the surface, he points to the fact that this woman's been answering phone calls for 30 years. I don't see the direct correlation between answering phone calls and fighting fires, but that seems to be what he's pointing to. However, if you dig a little bit deeper, it becomes more obvious why this person was appointed. This will be only the second woman to hold this position and the first openly gay person to hold this position. So it seems to be more of a DEI thing, which will, of course, be celebrated by progressives and by the political left because they'd rather have someone who's a female, they'd rather have someone who's gay being in charge of their city rather than having someone who has a career fighting fires being in charge of a fire department. So this is, again, this is kind of the one of the cruxes between conservative and progressive sentiment in the current political landscape. Should the people receiving jobs be people who have experience in the field, be people who are trained to serve specific positions? Should those be the people who are employed in those positions? Or should it be people who may have a certain skin color, may have a certain sexual identity, and those sorts of things? So, again, you can kind of see where Mamdani is going with his administration. It's in a more DEI direction, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is in opposition of the meritocracy system, which if you really have conversations on the ground with people who aren't, the straight white male who it seems to be the target of progressives, if you really have conversations on the ground with people who are outside of the straight white male category, and you ask them these same questions, should people who are skilled in a field be the ones who get those positions, or should people get a position just based on, things like skin color or sexual orientation? And, you know, people on the ground are not in support of these things. And Charlie Kirk made the analogy of a pilot. If you get on a plane, would you want your pilot to be the best pilot, or would you want him to be of a certain ethnic origin, ethnic background? And and then of course the left takes this as, oh well, Charlie Kirk must be racist because he doesn't want to have a black pilot, which of course that's not at all what he said. If a pilot is black, it shouldn't matter. What should matter is his ability to fly a plane. But again, this sort of woke ideology, this progressive movement, has really steered away from the direction of a merit-based system, a meritocracy, and is now moving in the direction of, well, what's your skin color? Where are you from? What religion do you practice? What is your sexual identity? And when you apply for a job, let's be real. What are you hoping that they ask you at an interview? Are you hoping that they ask you, well, did you pursue a degree that's relevant to this field? What sort of relevant work experience do you have for this position? Or would you rather them ask you what your skin color is? It's just this is a DEI selection to be the head of the fire department in New York City. God forbid there's a fire, kind of like what Ted Cruz said. Furthermore, he appointed a woman named C. Weaver as director of the mayor's office to protect tenants. So someone who's going to be working heavily in the housing industry of New York City. However, some of her past comments have come back into play currently regarding the state and the future of American housing, and in this case within New York City. Now, this woman is a member of the Democrat Socialist of America organization, so you can already start to guess where she's going to go with um, some of her policy prescriptions. Now, again, she's made some very controversial comments in the past regarding the issue of housing. Namely, she said that home ownership is a weapon of white supremacy and that it ought to be a collective good. Now, of course, this is right out of the playbook of socialists and communists that, private industry is the problem, and if everything were just owned by the government, that all of our problems would be solved. However, we've seen, as Kamala Harris said, we've seen this movie before. You don't have to point too far to see the outcome of pursuing such an agenda. And you can even look at Venezuela, the country we were just talking about. Just going back to 1950, not even 100 years ago, Venezuela had one of the strongest economies in the world. And then they start to implement socialized programs, they pursue a more communist agenda, and they are left in complete ruins, a completely oppressed country. Nobody has money, everyone is poor, and the only people who have access to anything are government officials, which is in practice what communism is. Now, I would go so far as to say that these beliefs are best described as stupid. Someone who believes that home ownership is a weapon of white supremacy and wants to collectivize housing as an overall good, these beliefs are stupid. And no one should be able, well, I guess you should be able to have these opinions, but no one should be accepted in the general body politic who goes so far as to say something like this. There's no place for it in our government. Again, because every single example of these policies being carried out all through human history have resulted in economic collapse. But maybe that's what people are looking for. They want the country's economy to collapse. Again, there's this very strong progressive movement to undermine Western principles, Christian Judeo principles, capitalistic principles, and to pursue these alternate agendas, oftentimes rooted in Islam, oftentimes rooted in socialism and communism, things that have just had a terrible effect every time they've been tried in every country that they've been tried in. But to look at this practically, what would it look like if New York City were to collectivize home ownership as a public good? Well, first and foremost, that means that the city would be seizing the property of homeowners. Likely, you'd be kicked out of your house. The government would then take ownership over it and furthermore decide who gets to live where. Now, if that's something you're interested in, is having your home seized from you and then being told where you get to live from now on, then maybe these policies are for you. But if you believe that home ownership is something to strive for, it's something to work for, and ultimately achieve throughout your career, then you'd probably call this person stupid. And if you break it down even further, property taxes compose about one third of the city's budget. So if you were to just seize property, you're no longer receiving property tax. And to remove one third from the city's budget, well, there goes New York City. It would completely collapse the city's economy. And again, to take it a step even further, you start seizing people's homes. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to move somewhere else. So not only are you going to lose property taxes, you're going to lose income taxes. And people who are homeowners, chances are, are a little bit further in their career and probably have a little bit higher income than most others who are not homeowners. So you're going to be losing a huge percentage of tax revenue that goes to the city. So again, this would be a move that would be done to collapse the economy. And again, that's something that's happened every single time in countries that pursue communism and socialism is the collapse of the economy. And so it comes to a certain point where people who are still in favor of these principles would be fair to assume that that's their goal is to collapse the economy. Now, with all that being said, we find ourselves at the end of another great episode. I certainly hope you were able to take something away from all of this, and I certainly hope to see you again very soon. My name is Brett Cody Fornatoro. Again, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I'll see you again soon.